Okay, hi, welcome. Hi, everybody. My name is Mike. I'm a horticulturist here at Conservation Garden Park. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about weeds. So let's start by defining what a weed is. So weeds are kind of what we decide they are. So weed is any kind of plant that is out of place. It's a plant growing where it just isn't welcome. It's a plant that is competitive, persistent, pernicious. They interfere with human activities and as a result are undesirable. That is actually the Ross and Lemby textbook, horticultural textbook, the textbook definition of weed. And so these are just a few ideas of what weeds are. Weeds can be basically anything, any type of plant. If it's not growing where you want it to, it's a weed. So those who say a job well done never needs redoing has never weeded a garden. Weeds are something you need to keep up on because if you don't, they will just kind of take over. So what is that weed and what do I spray on it? If you were kind of hoping that this is what the bulk of this class was going to be about, you're probably going to end up being a little bit disappointed. What we're going to do is we're going to talk a lot about strategies to deal with weeds that are kind of general in terms. We'll talk about different types of weeds and how to deal with those sort of classifications of weeds. Probably not going to spend a lot of time talking about like a specific weed and specifically what you do about it, although most individual weeds that you run into are going to fit into one of the categories we did talk about. You'll just kind of need to kind of figure out kind of where it goes from there. So instead of what is that weed, what do I spray on it, we actually kind of like this approach, a little bit more thoughtful. What is that weed? Why is it there? And how do I prevent it in the future? This is what we term as integrated pest management. It's a little bit of everything on the table, mechanical controls and spray controls later. But the idea is, what is the weed? So finding out what the weed is and knowing what the weed is. Why is it living in your landscape? And then what can you do to your landscape to prevent it from taking over? And it's going to be really the bulk of what we're talking about. So weeds are very hard to control. And so this is where I kind of give you permission to be frustrated with weeds. Weeds are super hard to control. Their seeds are literally everywhere. There are weed seeds all over the place. There can be nothing. There can't be nothing in a spot, right? If it's an empty spot that something can grow, nature will just plant something there. The truth is, if weeds weren't hard to control, we wouldn't be considering them weeds. So weeds are just really difficult to control. They come from a lot of the same plants as all of our favorite or desirable plants. So if you've loved plants over the years, there's probably some weed in that same family, the same genus, that is going to be in your landscape. They pop up wherever there's opening. If there's any kind of opening that can grow, there will be a weed there. And they have lots of different ways to defeat your control methods. Like I said, if they weren't persistent like this, they wouldn't actually be considered weeds. But they come in all the same families. This makes it hard to deal with because anything that kills the weeds, anything that you're talking about going out and trying to take care of your weeds with, will also kill your favorite plants. And so the trick is, how do we get rid of the weeds while promoting the plants that we do like here? The first thing we need to know about the weeds, though, is what is its life cycle? Is it an annual? Is it a perennial? Or is it a biennial? The fact here is that all of these things are going to be handled a little bit differently. So the first thing you need to know when you're dealing with the weed is, what is the weed? Figure out what the weed is. Do a little research, figure out what the life cycle is, because that's really going to determine how we battle that specific weed. So we're going to talk about the different life cycles. Annual is got a 1-year life cycle. So this is one where it sprouts and germinates, grows as a plant, flowers, spreads its seeds, and then dies. That's an annual's entire job right there. And it completes that in a single growing season. So in the spring, it germinates, pops up, it grows throughout the summer, and sometime in the middle of summer or fall, it'll start spreading its seeds to continue next year. The reason it's important, obviously, we'll kind of get to, but how you handle that weed is going to be different than how you handle a different type of weed. There are 2 annuals that we're going to be dealing with. One is called a summer annual, the other is called a winter annual. A summer annual germinates in the spring, is active all summer, so this is like crabgrass. Where a winter annual kind of germinates in the fall, overwinters as a very small seedling, and then pops up and it becomes a problem the following year. Okay, so what are annuals thinking? They have one job. They are producing seeds. They're dispersing those seeds around. They don't actually waste a lot of energy trying to develop a good root system, because anytime they get stressed or anytime they get even just a little outside of their comfort zone, they will just throw up a bunch of seed heads and kind of be done. So they don't usually waste a lot of time developing an extensive root system. For that reason, some of the annuals that you can actually just go out and pick, and there's almost no roots attached to them. Biennial has a 2-year life cycle. You can see over here, this is a bull thistle. This is what it looks like in the first year. It forms a rosette. It has to overwinter, and the winter conditions are what kicks in the flowering. And then the next year, it actually grows into its big form and then flowers. So you can see a little rosette like that one year becomes this big nasty thing the next. So what are biennials thinking? Now they're a lot like annuals in that they've kind of got one purpose, but they develop this rosette, and this rosette is to gain energy. Then the winter triggers the flowering, and then they grow, produce seed, and then die after the second season. They act very much like annuals. Biennials, however, can, if the conditions are right, throw out seed on their first year, or if the conditions are a little bit different, they can actually live a third or even a fourth year, just if the conditions allow for it. So what should humans be thinking about annuals and biennials? Don't let them go to seed. It's kind of like the most basic thing, but if you're letting seeds pop all into your yard, you're going to have the next year's or the coming year's problems already there. So don't let them go to seed. And the best way not to let them go to seed, obviously, is to not let them flower, because flowers are just going to quickly lead to seeds. So as with annuals, biennials both, don't let them go to seed. That is going to be your main job with those. So perennials. This is a plant with a life cycle of 3 years or more. A couple types we're going to talk about: simple perennial or creeping perennial. A simple perennial is like a dandelion. It develops a very simple root system, or in the case of a dandelion, it sends out a massive taproot, looks like a carrot, looks like a big carrot. So it's a pretty simple plant. Creeping perennials, on the other hand, send out a pretty extensive root system, and they're much harder to control. If you really want like the bad weeds of the world, they're these creeping perennials. Hoary cress, white top, and morning glory kind of fall into this category. They have many, or several layers of this spreading root underneath the ground to draw from if they lose the top, or they even lose a little bit of root system. Doesn't really bother them, because being perennials, they spend a lot of time developing their root system. Okay, so what are these perennials thinking? Produce seed if their energy supply permits, but it's not critical. They actually just want to live. So they will spend a lot of time developing a good, solid root system. Disperse seeds far away. A lot of these perennials, kind of like us, want our kids to grow up. They just want them to do them over there and away from them, where they're not taking our own resources. And so such is the same with plants. They want to disperse those seeds far away from them. They want to establish an extensive root system. Perennials will spend a lot of time putting a lot of energy into those roots. A dandelion will develop like what ends up being a kind of a massive carrot-like taproot, or something like morning glory or hoary cress will spend a lot of time drilling down into the soil, and they could potentially have roots 10 or 15 feet down on several different layers. Very difficult to deal with because of that extensive root system. They also do something where they develop this brittleness, and this is a survival mechanism. Everybody in this class has likely reached down to a dandelion or a weed and pulled it up and gotten a fistful of flowers and leaves, but the roots are still sitting under there. And that's because they can be really brittle at certain points, and that is actually a defense mechanism for this very reason. They spent so much time developing that root system. They like to maintain that root system, and breaking away from that root system easily is one of their defense mechanisms. All right, so what should perennials be thinking of weeds? So unlike annuals and biennials, where we're really trying to focus on just not letting them go to seed, and that usually takes care of the problem, perennial weeds are actually a lot more complicated to deal with, and we'll kind of get into it as we go. But one of the things we need to understand, or that I'm going to try to impress upon you or help you guys understand, is this whole idea of source to sink, where energy is moving from the plant at different times of the year, and this will help us battle perennials. You might want to know the difference between a selective or a non-selective herbicide. Selective obviously kills a specific type of plant and not others, where non-selective kind of kills everything. So there are different reasons why you use those different things. Understand the kind of the concept of apical dominance, and this is how a plant suppresses all of its latent buds, so it has one main growing point. But if that growing point is removed, all of these tertiary buds or these secondary buds can pop, and we'll talk about a strategy on how not to make that happen, because you end up with a much bigger problem. And you'll need to dig fairly deep if you're digging these out. That brittleness means that if you grab it and give it a pull, you're likely to end up with a bunch of top plant and not much in the way of weeds or roots, and you're really not going to solve the problem that way. So brittleness as a concept. Brittleness has a big advantage for these weeds because, like I said, pulling on them ends up just with the top, and this massive root system still intact. Okay, so this one we're going to talk about some strategies to deal with the specific types of weeds. We'll throw out an example of that weed, but whatever plant that you're dealing with or whatever weed you're dealing with, hopefully it fits into one of these categories. And how to deal with this category should at that point apply to your weed. So if you're thinking, you know, what do I do about this specific weed? Find out what category it falls into, and then as you think about that as we go along, and kind of adapt that strategy towards the specific plant you're dealing with. So we're going to deal with a couple of these. Annual weeds, crabgrass. Most people are familiar with this. This is a native plant to the United States. One single plant will develop about 150,000 seeds. The seeds can survive in the soil for about 15 years. And if that bothers you, just wait. We're going to get to some worse ones, I promise. Summer annual. This is summer annual. So this germinates in the late spring and thrives throughout the summer and then dies in the fall. This thing will only germinate at about 55 degrees, but you really want to prevent this thing from going to the seeds. So mowing this plant over actually just won't prevent this plant. It'll prevent it from growing. It'll actually seed out along the ground and do it that way. So you really want to get this plant pulled up, and you really don't want this plant to go to seed. So I get a lot of questions about crab apples, and crabgrass, and they'll be talking about a plant that's growing right now. If you've got a weedy grass growing in your lawn and it's growing right now, it is not crabgrass. Crabgrass won't germinate until the average temperatures are around 55 degrees, or right about the time the forsythia is blooming. So before that, it's going to be something a little more aggressive than crabgrass. So this is the best indicator for when crabgrass is germinating. It's when the yellow forsythia is blooming. And this is a pretty good time about the time the forsythia starts blooming, is a good time to go out and hit it with a pre-emergent. So all of those fertilizer plus pre-emergents you have on like a turf lawn fertilizer. When the forsythia is in bloom is the really perfect time to do that. You do it too early and you might lose it before the crabgrass germinates. You do it too late and it's already germinated, and the pre-emergent doesn't work on already germinated plants. So the other annual we're going to look at is this one. This is a puncture vine. This is a summer annual. This is native to the Mediterranean. One large plant could produce as many as 1 million seeds. I'm sure as anybody who has walked through a patch of these can attest. This one germinates all season. This is one of the few weeds that basically the second it starts blooming, it starts producing seed, and you will have seeds all season long after a plant. Good news about this is, I'm going to grab a drink of water. The good news about this plant is, as bad as it is, the seeds only last in the soil for about 4 years. If you can get out and take care of this plant for about 4 years, you can take care of the problem almost entirely. The funniest thing about this plant, though, is if you look at the scientific name, you see I've got it down there, is Tribulus terrestris. So tribulus is tribulation, terrestris just means earth. So this plant's scientific name is literally tribulation upon the earth, as we can mostly attest to. This is part of the Caltrop family. This is a family of plants that put out seeds that are shaped like caltrops. A caltrop is this four-pointed star that no matter which way it's sitting, one point is facing up, and they were used to stop cavalry back in the day. However, quick look on Amazon, you can see I found a 12-pack for pretty inexpensive. So the best way to deal with this particular one, and this is one of the methods that you can kind of adapt to some different plants, is the mechanical control. Sweeping up, vacuuming up, raking up, get the seeds up off the ground, and that should keep them from, that'll keep them from germinating. A couple of other things that we've seen work is we've seen people rolling old pumpkins or old carpeting or carpet pad across an area. The seeds will stick to that, and then you just throw the whole thing away. But physically cleaning these up is actually a really good way to deal with puncture vine, which everybody calls goat's head. So that's the same plant right there. All right, so this is our winter annual, and this is shepherd's first. So winter annual, again, it'll germinate in the fall, overwinter as a small seedling, and then pop up with the main plant in the spring, and then seed. So this is native to Europe. Single plant produces just several thousand seeds, and is viable for many years. These vague terms are the best I could come up with because I think people haven't bothered to count how many seeds they drop or how many years they are viable for. But the cool thing about this plant, and I guess it's cool, but one of the strategies of this plant is those little purses will open up and actually fling the seeds across the area. So this is what it looks like in the spring. So it'll actually overwinter, like that left picture, in the rosette form. And then in the following summer, after a bit of cold, it'll pop up and disperse seed in the following summer. So this is a biennial, and this is prickly lettuce. So prickly lettuce is native to Europe, but is naturalized in North America almost in every state and every county. Like, this is one of those that have popped up and is really everywhere right now. This is a winter annual, or it's a very short-lived perennial. If conditions are really good for this kind of a plant, they'll go ahead and overwinter if it's a mild winter and try to bloom and then seed again the next year. If conditions are kind of harsh, they'll actually put all of their energy into seeding in the first year, and then so they won't be a biennial at that point either. So they're pretty versatile depending on the conditions. Tens of thousands of seeds comes off a single plant, and serves the seeds can germinate like immediately. They'll hit the ground and be popped up within a week or so. So this problem, it's why this thing has naturalized throughout so much of the country. This is what prickly lettuce looks like during its rosette form. So take a good look at that. Make sure we get these pulled up and we don't have to worry about the seeds later on. So this, in year 2, after the rosette form, produces this bright yellow flower, which become these little parachute seedlings, seed heads, a little like a dandelion does. These disperse in the wind, and like a dandelion, the little parachutes on those and the seeds all come in like different sizes. So you'll have big parachutes with little seeds, or little seeds with small parachutes, and so it makes a pretty even dispersion in the wind, because the big seeds with little parachutes don't go as far as the big parachutes with little seeds, and so you end up with kind of an even distribution as it goes away from the plant. Dandelion, a plant I know that everybody is familiar with. This is actually an herb that some people have made tea or other things out of, and uses it for salad and eating. So if you want to go out there and pull this up and have a salad, I think you should do that. It's native to Eurasia, which is a little like saying it's native to about half the world. It's got a huge taproot. This is very much, if you pull one of these out, the taproot is very much like a carrot, and that's really what it looks like. There's some studies that they've done on dandelions, and they weeded out 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, and then they posted a paper, and this was a university some time back, and the paper kind of summed up the entire thing in one sentence. Didn't go deep enough. So 3 inches probably isn't even enough to get this thing out. So if you're going to dig this out, make sure you really get down there and dig it out. Okay, common dandelion, what it looks like, and the seed heads. The seed head, again, wind distribution, like we talked about, very even distribution because of the size and shape of those parachutes and the size and shape of those seeds attached to it. This is not a nice scarf. People who fight with weeds all the time, like this is not even funny, right? So one of the ways to deal with dandelions is there are 2 times a year when you can spray them, and it's more effective than other times of the year. And this is that whole source to sink thing we talked about a little earlier. I'll explain that more here in a bit. But when the lilac is blooming, that is a really good time to spray dandelion with something like a 2,4-D or a Roundup if you're going to spray it. The reason for this is right about the time the lilacs are blooming, the dandelion has come up, had a flush of growth, had a flush of flowers, and at that point it's kind of taken inventory and starts to reverse the process of putting a little more energy back down into its roots, so for survival for later. And right about the time the lilac blooms is when that's happening. And so spraying it with them, because herbicides tend to follow the natural sugars in a plant, would find that following the sugars down to the roots. So anytime you can get the sugars moving to the roots is a good time to spray something. The other time to spray a dandelion is when the quake eggs are gold, so in the fall, and this is really for the same reason. The plant is a perennial. This is going to last a really long time, and all of the energy is no longer towards seed production or flower production. It is for getting as much energy as it can and sending it to that root so that it can overwinter and then come back out next year. And with all the sugars moving down, that's another good time to spray it because that will get it deeper into the root. Perennials. Everybody knows this plant. This is field bindweed. It's morning glory, so this is part of the morning glory family. Everybody knows this as morning glory. We call it field bindweed just to differentiate it because it is a weed for us. This is a creeping perennial. If you want the real bad actors of the weed world, this is certainly one of them. It is one of the hardest, most difficult plants to deal with anywhere. So if you're dealing with a field bindweed somewhere, like I wish you the best of luck. They're a little tough to deal with. Can be done, but they're kind of tough to deal with. This produces in several ways. It reproduces by seeds. It reproduces by roots. It puts out seeds. The seeds can last in the soil for about 50 years or more. So these seeds have been tested for many years. So that morning glory coming up in your yard may have rooted back in the 70s before it popped up. One of the best approaches for this is to wait till the fall, again when all the energy is heading down into the roots, and then hit it with something like a 2,4-D, because actually this plant is pretty susceptible to 2,4-D damage, and so it pulls it down into its roots, and you can actually get a pretty good control on it. But here's the thing about field bindweed: you can kill many feet of root, and all that does is just cut it off from its main source. All of those secondary buds that are in the soil and are 10 or 15 feet down will just pop. It'll take some time to get to the surface, but up it will come. So again, this is one of the hardest plants in the weed world to deal with. Some say yes.
We had a question, and maybe you already answered it and I just missed it, or maybe you're going to answer it. But we had a question about field bindweed, and it says, what is a good method without spraying to control field bindweed? This person has a pollinator garden and they don't want to spray anything. What are some of your suggestions?
Okay, yeah, no, I can sympathize with this. So if you're not going to spray, the only other really good way to do it is kind of a mechanical control. So every time you see a bindweed pop its head up, if you took a weed knife to it and just dug it out, or a shovel and then just dug it out, you'd eventually frustrate that weed to where it would never get a good hold. So that'd be a good way to do it. But I would just keep on it. Like if this field bindweed is as much a management issue as it is, because it's hard to get a permanent solution on bindweed. But if you're not going to spray it, and that's fine, I completely sympathize with somebody who doesn't want to break out chemical, especially in a garden designed for pollinators. The next best best method is going to get yourself a good weed knife or a good weeding tool and try to weed that out as deep as you can get, and do it the second you see it pop its little head out. So it can be done. We do it here at the garden plenty, where we just dig them out and we don't try to do any kind of chemical methods on them in the main garden proper. So just keeping up on it would be the best way to go about it.
Hey, Mike, I would also add to that unfortunately with some of these weeds, and morning glory is one of them, the idea that you can like eventually get rid of it completely is probably a lost cause. So
yeah,
it's management.
Yeah, with film bindweed, you really are just managing this issue probably for the long term. So I wish I had better news for you on that one. This is what field bindweed roots look like. So if you're wondering why you have such a difficult time managing it, and those roots can go down quite a bit. And the second you break off the top, and this is that apical dominance thing I talked about. There's lots of little buds along those roots. The second you kill off, whether chemically or with a seed knife or with a weed knife, second you kill off the top, all of those secondary buds that were being controlled by that main plant are no longer being controlled, and then up they kind of all pop. This is why taking a tiller, for instance, to a patch of field bindweed would just end up giving you about 100,000 small field bindweed plants. This is what the seeds look like. They're 1 millimeter big. They're really tiny. And the sad reality is these seeds are probably already existent in every square foot of soil pretty much everywhere, and they last a long time. So it's a really tough one. This is a really tough one. This is a constant maintenance task for you. And if you've got it, you'll probably be fighting with it, on a management level for a really long time. Wish I had better news for you on that one. But a similar plant, at least one that acts similarly to that one, is this one. It's quackgrass. This is a creeping perennial, native to Europe, Western Asia. Spreads similarly to field bindweed with roots and rhizomes. The seeds, however, only last about 2 to 4 years. So if you can get this plant kind of under control with the weeds, it becomes much easier to control as you go forward. The biggest problem when dealing with quackgrass is that anything that kills quackgrass, because it is a grass, will also kill your lawn. So trying to get something like this out of a lawn area can be fairly difficult. If you're dealing with a weedy grass right now, and I do get people who will bring in something and ask me about crabgrass. Again, crabgrass not up yet. You're more likely dealing with this if it's in your landscape right now than you are with it being crabgrass. This is what the seeds look like over here, but there is something where if you kind of pull the grass from the bottom and pull it up, when you get to the top and it's got these 3 little trident spikes, that's kind of one of the ways you can evaluate it to see if what you have is actually crabgrass. Quackgrass. This is quackgrass roots. Like field bindweed, they go down, they spread out, and they keep spreading. Simply removing some or digging some out is likely to pop all of the remaining buds along that line, and you end up getting a bunch. I'll deal with that in a minute here, and I'll kind of explain why it works that way. Small bulbs. This is one until a couple years ago I actually didn't have in the class, but I get asked about it all the time, so I thought we'd go ahead and talk about it here. So small bulbs, things like muscari, which is grape hyacinth. This is native to southern Utah. It takes like 4 years to flower. Seeds readily and reproduced by seeds, but also reproduced by bulblets. So if you have a little patch of it, the patch itself just keeps developing more bulbs. However, it's the seeds, or it's the spreading of the seeds that are really how it spreads. What this plant does is daffodils, tulips, things like this that are bulbs actually do spread by seed. It just takes a while. So what happens is the grape hyacinths, this muscari, will disperse a bunch of seeds throughout. They'll sit in an area, and then they will spend about 4 years developing a small root system, and then really just kind of getting ready to pop up. So by the time you see the little pretty blue flower pop up, it's already been growing a root system for like 4 years. It's one of the reasons that bulblets like this are actually really difficult to deal with. The other one we have those like that is Star of Bethlehem that we've seen around here. And also we get like a wild onion that looks really similar to Star of Bethlehem that are also bulblets and are kind of the same way. The difference between them is a Star of Bethlehem is actually part of the lily family. So if it smells like onion, it's more likely to be one of the wild onions. And if it doesn't, it's more likely to be the Star of Bethlehem. But native to the Mediterranean, spreads through bulbs, not seeds, so it's actually not as quite as aggressive as seeds. And oddly enough, this is a monocot. Like Star of Bethlehem is a monocot, like a grass, which means something like if it's growing in your yard, the 2,4-D actually won't touch it, because 2,4-D doesn't kill the grass because the grass is a monocot. The 2,4-D actually wouldn't kill this plant because this plant is also a monocot. So if you're dealing with this, you'll have to do something that kills monocots instead of dicots. Just when you're out looking for that kind of things. So we're going to talk about some different methods of weed control as we go through here. But something I'd like you to remember is this term, integrated pest management. Integrated pest management is all methods are on the table. All methods have their uses, and all methods are used to some degree. Okay, prevention, cultural, mechanical, biological, chemical, all of those have their place. So prevention is just anything you can do to keep the weed from coming in. Cultural is just keeping mulch or something on just the way you maintain a landscape can have a big effect on what kind of weeds might want to grow there. Mechanical is something like taking that weed knife and just digging the weed out. Biological is encouraging just something that would naturally kill that plant in life. And chemical, of course, is breaking in the spray. You'll notice chemical is last. That's because that's where we think that some chemicals are useful, but we also think they are the last resort. Prevention. So this is kind of the recipe for us. Prevent arrival, prevent establishment, and then if it does manage to show up, prevent it from spreading. Weeds can arrive in multiple ways. They can blow in from your neighbor's yard through the wind. They can come in from the people taking care of your lawn, just attached to the lawnmower blade or the lawnmower itself. They can come in on topsoil or mulch. They can just kind of be in there. So there's lots of ways these things can arrive. Don't let them establish themselves and then get going, or you'll be dealing with it it becomes a little harder to deal with. Clean equipment might be the best way to deal with it, particularly if you've got you've hired the neighbor kid, or you've got a service that comes and mows your lawn. There's a pretty good chance they don't stop along the way and steam the bottom of their equipment to make sure they don't bring any weed seeds or pathogens to your yard. But a good cleanliness is one of the real keys to preventing this from arriving at your place. But this is one of the more common ways right here. It's just somebody who mowed one lawn and then came to your house and mowed yours. Topsoil is another very common way that they can end up at your place. This is one of the reasons that I would recommend most people to not use topsoil. Most people like to get that topsoil to get a few things started. But 2 or 3 inches of topsoil honestly isn't going to do a whole lot of good. Things are still going to have to root into the soil you have underneath that topsoil, especially if you're planting a woody plant. And over time, it's just going to have to adapt to what you have. And it would be better doing that right from the get-go. So because of the pathogens or weed seeds that topsoil can bring, and I don't really believe it brings all that much benefit, I would say just steer clear of topsoil. This is a pile out in Farmington that I saw once upon a time. I actually came here to buy topsoil, and if you're thinking, where's the topsoil? It's that hill with all those weeds growing on it. And I don't think they went through and screened all the weed seeds out before they gave us the topsoil. So this is just one of the reasons I say maybe stay away from the topsoil. Compost, they can actually come on into the compost. You can see this one right here. There's a few weeds actually growing out of this. The best way to keep the weed seeds from getting into your yard via compost is to make sure it is composted properly. And the temperature you're looking for is something like 140 or 145 degrees. This is a thermometer that is kind of easily acquirable online or from a garden store. So if you have your own compost bin, you want to make sure that thing gets up to 140 at least. That will kill the vast majority of them, even though it probably won't kill them all. And if you are getting your compost from another source, call them, talk to them, ask how hot they get it. Any good composter is going to know what that temperature is, and you're going to want that temperature to be above that 140-degree mark. Prevent establishment or prevent spread. One of the best things you can do, honestly, to prevent weed seeds once they've arrived at your house is to mulch. 2 or 3 inches of mulch over the top of everything keeps the seeds in the dark, and it should keep them from being able to germinate while they're down there. So use of a drip irrigation. So the water is getting on the ground underneath the mulch, and so weed seeds that are arriving on the top are sitting on top of the mulch, and they're not getting watered. The stuff underneath might be getting some water, but they're not getting a lot of light because of the mulch. And so mulch and drip irrigation are 2 of the single best things you can do to keep weeds from establishing in your landscape. Avoid soil compaction, avoid disruption. So soil that gets disrupted is a big opening for weeds. If a tiller goes through an area or something like that, digs it up, those weed seeds that were kind of underneath there now come up to the surface, and now they can pop up. Avoid compaction. So if you're walking or driving over an area in your landscape or your lawn or something like that, there's a lot of weeds that actually really find that an easy environment to live in, where a lot of our favorite plants don't. So all you end up getting with that kind of thing is you end up getting the weeds. And then as a last resort, we can break out the herbicide if we deem that appropriate. Here is landscape weed control prevention methods. This is our control recipe. 1, water with drip irrigation in your planting beds. Okay, this is really important. If you're spraying overhead spray, not only is it watering a lot of things you don't want to be watered, it's going to activate all those weed seeds. Overhead spray increases pathogens, diseases in your landscape as well. So watering with the drip in your planting beds is huge, and it's important. Applying 2 to 4 inches of mulch. Again, you're watering underneath the mulch. Weed seeds are lining on top of the mulch, and that is really the best way to go about keeping weeds out of your landscape. Avoid the soil compaction, minimize any kind of disruptions, and then after you've done these steps, if you still deem it, go ahead and break out the herbicides, as long as you've checked out the herbicides are going to work on your plant and your location. We'll talk about that a little bit as we go too. Drip irrigation looks like this. Sits on the soil, waters just what's needed on the soil, and the mulch covers that up. So good layer mulch just prevents a lot of those seeds from popping up. The best approach to those annual, biennial weeds are burying all those seeds under 2 or 3 inches of mulch and then starving them of light. Good layer mulch retains moisture. It looks better than bare soil. Again, bare soil invites weeds to come in, and weed seeds sitting around the top aren't going to germinate as well either, because the overhead spray isn't getting them wet. A good layer of mulch is a good discouragement for weeds. So there's a couple different types of mulch you can look at. One is just plain compost. Compost makes great mulch. We use it plenty out here. Small bark mulch. So this is a bark mulch, a little chunkier, a little more aeration flow through there. What makes for a good mulch. And this over here is arborist chips. A lot of growing evidence on the benefits of arborist chips. Arborist chips are these tree services who have cut out limbs of a tree or taken down a tree and then chipped up the whole thing. And so you end up getting the leaves and the stems and the flowers or whatever else is in that tree that you can use as a mulch. And there's a lot of good evidence that this is really beneficial for the soil microbes, and it works as a good mulch. If anybody's ever heard of the local chip drop, this is what chip drop would bring you, is the arborist chips. You can also go with a non-organic mulch, and this is the mulches that don't break down, and so it's the gravels. You can see several different gravels we have here. There's some really good-looking gravel you can put down, these non-organic mulches. They'll look good. They'll look good always. They won't break down, and you can clean them out with a leaf blower. You can't really do that with the wood chips or the compost, and they stay looking good for a really long time. They don't improve your soil and do a few other things that I think are organic mulches do for you, but they do have their benefit, particularly in something like a park strip between your sidewalk and your street. It doesn't drift out of your park strip, and compost can sometimes end up in the drains of the park strip, and this doesn't do that. Avoid compaction. So if you're walking or driving over an area, like, it's going to compact the soil. A lot of things don't like to grow in compacted soil, but there are plenty of weeds that absolutely just love that. And once the grass starts to thin out an area, because grass doesn't grow well in compacted soil, for instance, weeds are going to be the first thing that find their way into those spots. And so that becomes a source of weeds in your landscape, because once those start coming up, they start going to seed, they start kind of spreading from there. So this gives weeds, compaction gives weeds a good foothold in your landscape. Avoid disruption. I am of the no-till camp of things, and I think the evidence over the past 10 or 15 years kind of proves this out. Even for a vegetable garden, I would actually discourage tilling. Tilling does a couple things. It, right below where the tines are hitting, actually kind of creates a compacted hard pan right there, and that can actually cause some drainage issues with water, because the water doesn't want to pass through it as easily. All of those weed seeds that were sitting 4 or 5 inches under the soil that weren't bothering anybody are now up at the surface. You've also kicked up a lot of oxygen into that soil as well, which can get a lot of the microbes going that can cause some other things. So I am of the no-till. You plant something there, the roots go down. When the plant goes dormant every year, a bunch of the roots also die, and so you have organic matter that way. You get a lot of bugs that eat the organic matter and then create humus, the humates that binds all these soil particles together, which create channels for water, channels for air to pass through, and these humates are great for your soil. And again, bringing the tiller in actually chops up a lot of the fungal webs that are forming in there, or those channels that got formed by the aggregates when the humates stuck the soil particles together. So even for a vegetable garden, I would actually recommend just going without the tiller. And if you're really curious about that, just kind of start Googling around on no-till gardens and get a good idea of what they're doing in those places. So weed barrier fabric. This creates a barrier on the ground. It prevents weeds in the ground from germinating and growing in the landscape. Weed barrier fabric, if you read the instructions on weed barrier fabric, is the greatest thing ever. But it does absolutely none of that. It is one of the worst things you can do in your landscape. And if you think I'm anti-tillage, get me started on weed barrier fabric. I don't think weed barrier fabric is useful at all, and there's a lot of reasons why. Weed barrier fabric causes compaction. This picture over here is a tree where we pulled the weed fabric out of there after probably 15 or 20 years, and those roots were running right at the surface because the soil is really compacted in that area. This prevents organic matter from going into the soil. On top of the weed fabric is a nice layer of really beautiful compost that has broken down over the last 20 years. None of it got into the soil. So the soil where these plants actually have to live are compact. There's not much water because the compaction is running the water off. There's no oxygen in there, and frankly, there's nothing living down in there. We pulled out weed fabric here and dug around. There's no worms, there's no microorganisms, because there is no organic matter. And to boot, like, the final thing is it doesn't even prevent the weeds from growing here. It does keep them down for a little bit, maybe a year or two, But what happens is dirt, compost, other things on the top of that weed barrier fabric, the things just start to root into that, and then off they go, and you really haven't solved the problem. I guess we could have like a conversation about whether or not weed fabric works. If it actually worked, I mean, we could debate it against those other things. But since it doesn't actually work, and it does those other bad things, stay away from the weed barrier fabric. It's really not good for the landscape. And plus, we have found in areas where the weeds have taken hold on top of the fabric, trying to pull them out is a world-class pain, because all those roots are actually now bound up in the fabric and grown through the fabric now. And we try to pull them out, but the roots are actually still there underneath the fabric, because they're broken off. We've actually been removing it here at the garden for most of my tenure here, and one of these days I'll have it all gone. But it was one of those things that we all thought was a good idea, 20 years ago, and now all the real research on it shows that it's not just bad, it's really bad for the landscape. So no weed barrier fabric. And this includes this. So this is various sheet mulching. So this is newspaper, cardboard, things like that. They've got all kinds of things that happen here. Much like weed barrier fabric, these sheet mulches will prevent airflow. It tends to kill the microbes underneath. And one of the things that I was looking at when I was researching on the sheet mulch and the cardboard is newspaper and cardboard are what scientists feed like termites when they're trying to keep them alive. So they actually do attract some termites to the landscape, which I don't think we want either. A vegetable garden might be a little different in this regard. One of the problems with the sheet mulch, particularly like newspaper and cardboard, is if it dries out, it actually becomes hydrophobic. So wet cardboard, for instance, will actually just run the stuff off, and you really have to soak that cardboard in order to start getting the water to get underneath it. Now, if it's living in a vegetable garden that you're watering every day and you're keeping it more moist, that might be a little more out for use in the landscape. Sheet mulches really don't work any better than the landscape fabric, which I really don't like much either. So I would kind of steer clear of this. Mulch works really well. Just the good old-fashioned organic mulch. So weed prevention in lawns, mow high. So a good 3 inches. So set your mower to a good 3 inches, and that'll really help crowd out the weeds underneath. It also makes the lawn really more competitive for like water and things like that. And so there's just not as many resources for those weeds. Water it correctly. If you overwater lawn, you'll have a bunch of extra water that the weeds will be using too. Don't use an edger. Use an edger. Don't bevel the edge of the lawn. So people will tend to take the string trimmer along, they say, the sidewalks, and clean up the edge of the sidewalk with a layer where the grass gets really small by the sidewalk, because that makes for a nice clean edge. Well, the other way to get a nice clean edge is use an edger, and it doesn't make the lawn really small in that edge. That small part of the edge actually is just an invitation for weeds to pop up. Fertilize based on need. Over-fertilization is going to lead to excessive weeds because there are certain times of year. So lawn doesn't want to grow much during the middle of summer, for instance. And in the middle of summer, if you're doing a lot of water and to keep it going, and you're doing a lot of fertilizing towards like a Kentucky bluegrass in the middle of summer, that lawn is actually trying to go dormant a little bit, and it's not really using the fertilizer as much, but your weeds will be. So watering in the middle of summer is really a good way to just get those weeds. But again, find out how much fertilizer you need. Just fertilize what you need. Use a hand tool before using an herbicide, and then pull them up before they get to seed. People often ask me, like, what's my favorite way to get rid of weeds? And there it is. This tool sits at my side, 8 hours a day here at work. All my gardeners have the same thing. Natalie has the same thing at her side, all 8 hours she's here. And this is the primary tool we use to deal with weeds right here. There are some things we can do after that if the weed knife is becoming ineffective, or there's maybe a bigger area, but this whole garden, generally speaking, is kept up with a tool that's just like that. Herbicides. So we're going to let's talk a little bit about this because it is the final, but we should probably give a little bit of talk about the herbicides. But a little bit of nomenclature I want to run past you just so we can be talking about the same thing. Pre-emergent kills a weed before it breaks the surface. So the way a pre-emergent works is it puts a small layer of herbicide across the entire length of the soil, and when a seed germinates and the seedling comes up, it hits that layer and then absorbs the herbicide and then dies. That's kind of how it works. Okay, a post-emergent kills already existing weeds. This is like Roundup. This is like Weed Be Gone, for instance. A contact herbicide kills only the parts of the weed that you sprayed. So there's a lot of herbicides out there that will just kill what you sprayed on, but not the roots. This is a little like breaking out like a flame torch or a weed dragon or something like that actually kills off the top, and it's about as effective really as just cutting the plant off at the surface. Systemic herbicide gets into the weed and is translocated throughout the weed. It follows the sugars that are moving throughout this plant, and then follows that, and then that's how it kills the entire thing, because the sugars are moving into the leaves, into the flower, into the roots. There are better times to use that than others depending on the plant. So, but that is what a systemic herbicide is. So pre-emergent, again, things like trifluralin and dimension creates this barrier across the top. Weed seeds germinate, they hit the herbicide barrier, and then they die. It doesn't actually prevent the seeds from germinating, I think a lot of people kind of think it does, but it does kill it shortly after that it does germinate. The big trick about the herbicide, though, is you got to make sure you get that herbicide down before the seeds start to germinate. So whatever plant you're targeting, make sure you get it down before that, and make sure you do not disturb that area afterward, or you'll break that seal that it's done. This is only going to work on newly germinating seeds, and it won't work on established plants. So you can put it in your lawn. It won't kill the lawn, but it will kill, say, the crabgrass coming up. You do need the right timing. After the seed germinates, it's too late. And if you do it too far ahead of time, it has a tendency to get disturbed, and it tends to break your protection. So any disturbance in that soil will just make it so that you're no longer protected in that spot. So this is mainly, honestly, for annual weeds like crabgrass and things like that you have every year. This is not going to work on bindweed. This is not going to work on dandelion, things like that. This is really only going to work on the annual weeds. It might also work on like a newly germinating field bindweed plant, but that's really not the problem that you're generally dealing with. You only have a few days, though, to water this in. So once you put this in, you actually start losing a lot of the herbicide to the atmosphere. And if you look at the label, it'll tell you how much water you need to put on in order to dissolve it and to create that layer. And it's really important that you read that label, because otherwise it's not really working in that spot. Pre-emergence easily failed. If you're out there playing baseball and you slide in the base, all of that herbicide is going to be gone. Systemic herbicide. So this is the systemic means it gets into that system and kind of follows the sugar system inside that plant. So a selective systemic only affects the selected types. That's what selective is of the plant. So Weed Be Gone and Grass Be Gone. Grass Be Gone kills grass, but doesn't kill broadleaf plants. Where Weed Be Gone kills the dandelions and the other broadleaves, but doesn't kill the grass. So, but those are systemics. They get into the plant and they follow it around. Spraying these generally in the fall is way better than spraying these things in the spring. So the non-selective, this affects all the plants. This is things like Roundup or Killzall. This is the glyphosate, for instance, that will kill all plants, and it is really non-selective, but it is a systemic, and it will get into that plant and try its best to kill all the roots in that plant as well. So selective versus non-selective. You can see out here on the left, somebody took a non-selective herbicide and sprayed a bunch of areas. Upon closer inspection of this area, if you look really close to that right, and it's hard to see, but if you look close, you'll see a dying dandelion in the middle of all of those. So somebody decided to spray the dandelions with a non-selective systemic herbicide, probably something like Roundup. Roundup works better on grass than it does on broadleaf, so it actually killed off the grass long before it actually killed off whatever it is they were trying. I think mostly it was dandelions. So they killed off the grass a lot sooner. This is, I think, what they were hoping for, was a selective herbicide, something that just killed those broadleaves. So you can see the dandelions are all dying, but the grass isn't touched. And that is what a selective herbicide would do. There is a selective systemic herbicide that kills grass, but not broadleaves. So something like Grass Be Gone. And you can see in this example, they actually, one neighbor sprayed it and the other one didn't. And they actually did a pretty effective job killing the grass out of that garden bed while leaving the more broadleaf flowers alone, where the other neighbor decided not to do that. So this chemical does work. It is much slower than, say, your typical 2,4-D or your typical Roundup, much slower than that. And it's not the prettiest smell in the world, but if you give it enough time, it really does work. It's pretty effective. So for controlling grass in a garden bed, fluazaflop is the Grass Be Gone. It's probably the easiest to get a hold of, but clethodim works too, or cefoxyldim, which is called Post or Segment, a few others like that. That gets rid of grass in broadleaf beds. So I did want to explain this concept to everybody, and this is why herbicide actually works in a plant and why it works sometimes better than others. And this is the source to sink. So the basics of this sort of thing are where the sugars are going. Now, in the spring, sugars are really going into the leaves of the plant, trying to develop the flowers. So spraying something in the spring, you're much more likely to kill the top and not effectively kill the roots of a plant. Where if you hit it in the fall, it's going to follow the sugars, which are more going to the roots of a perennial plant. A perennial plant is really trying to send as much energy it can to those roots so it can overwinter. And if you hit it with herbicide, then you get more herbicide into the roots. And killing the roots is really the most effective way to get rid of that plant, permanently. So, and then there's this idea. This is apical dominance. If you'll kind of see over here on this left side, you get the auxin source, and you've got the tip of the plant growing, and it is putting in a chemical called auxin, and it's suppressing all these auxiliary buds growing beneath it. So all of these buds are dormant. If you're to cut that off, you cut off the auxin source. All of these are now no longer in control, and they're going to pop up like this. So this is why if you were to take a tiller to a field bindweed, you'd actually just be cutting off the auxin source or that control tip, and all of those auxiliary buds would now be free to pop up. So when you're killing a plant, make sure that you're not just cutting the tip off something and thus causing a bunch of the plant's auxiliary buds to go crazy. This is why I say if you were to pinch back a flower, it gets bushier, because you've caused all of those buds down below it to pop by taking away that main source. But with a weed, you don't want to do this, because all of that is now going to be growing, and you can cause a bigger problem. So this is just one of those things I wanted you to know to be careful about when you're dealing with plants. Is cutting off an auxin source, cutting a plant in random's place, or even tilling through certain plants, you're likely to just create a bunch of smaller plants. So this is kind of just more of a real life example of that. If you were to pull this plant here that's in control, all of the buds all the way up and down that line would probably pop up, and you'd cause yourself an even worse problem. Okay, so we're going to cover this last, and this is spraying. So herbicides have their place. They are towards the bottom of our list, but they have a place. I.P.M suggests that all things can have a place. And so we'll use this a little more cautiously, but there are times when you need to bring this out. And if you're going to spray, if you decided to spray, there's some stuff here you really need to know. Read the label. Make sure you know what the label says. The label actually is a contract. You're essentially signing by using that product. But if you read that label, you'll find a lot of information about what weeds it works on. If you're spraying a pesticide or an herbicide on a plant that isn't going to kill the plant you're targeting, now you're just doing this for recreation because it's not actually doing much good. So you need to know the weed you're targeting to make sure it's actually in that label. And then you need to decide if spraying is better than just hand weeding. And also, how much weed pressure can you take? Is one dandelion in your yard enough to kind of break out the big guns of the weed? How many weeds before you actually start to do something? So maybe a few weeds here and there aren't enough to trigger like an all-out war on that particular weed. So you do have to decide for yourself, like, how much of the weed pressure is going to be before you decide to like hand pull it. How much after that before you start breaking out some of the bigger guns and start spraying things. So before you spray, you'll notice this is Spectracide. You'll notice that the little label says stop, read entire label before use. I'm here to tell you, read the label. You may think you kind of know what you're getting into, but read that label. You really do need to know if that plant that pesticide is going to kill the herb, the actual weed that you're spraying it on. You need to know how long it has to be before it gets rain on. You need to know what where it might drift or what damage it might cause if it starts drifting around. You want to know what protection you need to wear while you're using it, and you need to know how to like administer first aid if for some reason you end up getting some on yourself. And all of that is in this label. So really give this label a good once through, and keep in mind that this label, that whole label in there, is a legally binding contract that you are signing by actually using this product. So a few things that you really want to look at when you're reading this label. First thing you really want to look at is that mode of action. This is a group 9 herbicide. If you are dealing with a weed problem and you decide sometimes to spray more than one thing, or one thing didn't work and you're spraying from a group 9, don't spray from another group 9, because the mode of action and how it kills that plant is going to be exactly the same. Look for a group 7 or a group 6 mode of action. It all went dark here. Look through the active ingredient, and so in this case, Roundup Pro is main ingredient is going to be glyphosate. Look at the product information and assistance. It'll actually give you a phone number to call in case of emergency or something like that. Over here, you'll see the protective equipment that it expects you to wear when you're spraying, and then it gives you this caution statement. So this statement is really a big deal. So caution is its lowest toxicity. But it just kind of goes up from there, and you really want to know what that says about the toxicity level. So caution is number 1. This is slightly toxic if eaten or absorbed through the skin or inhaled, or it will cause slight eye or skin irritation. Warning is moderately toxic if eaten or absorbed through the skin or inhaled, or causes moderate eye or skin irritation. Dangerous, highly toxic through at least one route of exposure. So it may be corrosive. It may cause irreversible eye damage. May cause permanent damage to the skin or eyes. So this is some highly toxic stuff. Be careful. Danger poison is highly toxic and may cause irreversible damage through the eyes or skin. It is highly toxic if eaten or absorbed through the skin or inhaled. So that caution statement is really something you want to know, kind of what you're dealing with. There's directions for use on this label, and then there is storage and disposal. If you this is necessary if you're going to not use it all. And as far as I know, the only legal way to dispose of herbicide is to use the product as directed. So you can't actually throw it in the garbage. You can't dump it down your sink. The only way to legally get rid of Roundup is to use the Roundup on a plant in your yard. So that's really the only legal way to get rid of it. This is on the label. It'll tell you what plants it's effective on. Again, if your plant is not on this list, you might be just spraying this as a recreation and not doing yourself much good as far as your weeds go. So when I say know the weed you're targeting, you do need to know what that weed is, because you do need to know if it's on that label. You also, like, the next best thing you need to know is its life cycle. Is it a creeping perennial? Is it an annual? Is it a winter annual? Is it a biennial? The strategy changes up a little depending on what that is. You also going to want to know the site where your weed is growing. Some chemicals will say they are fine for your landscape as long as you're not near a river, for instance, or a canal, and you'll want to know what the site restrictions are before you go spraying. So one of the big reasons, I would say, just as a commentary here, is one of the reasons we do caution spray, and it does come out kind of last, is if you start thinking about this and start thinking about those caution statements, start knowing where the site is and kind of all these limitations, you start realizing how toxic this stuff really is, and it is something to be treated with some caution. One of the best ways to find out where or what a weed is of course classes just like this one. So you guys have already kind of shown the initiative to come out and take this class here. The other way is this one. This is an extension at usu.edu, and this actually has a common weeds of the yard and garden that flips like a little book, but it is a digital book. It is really useful in helping you identify what the actual plant is. And again, knowing what the plant is a big deal, because you'll need to know its life cycle, and you also need to know if it falls on a label of something you might want to spray on it. And then you kind of have to decide at some point if spraying it is worthwhile, or if another method would work first. Maybe a weed knife works. Maybe you invite all your friends out with shovels to come help you do some weeding, and that's how you want to approach that particular weed. So consider other methods, first before you break out the big stuff. So some final thoughts on using herbicides. Annual weeds like crabgrass, you can use a pre-emergent, but only if it's the right time of year. Again, if you miss the germination, it really won't work at all, because it's already germinated. If you do it too early, you run the risk of it fading away and you're not having it when the time comes. Biennials like prickly lettuce, you can use pre-emergent for the seed, or if they come up in their little rosette form, you can use a systemic herbicide on it. Your simple perennials like your dandelions, systemic herbicide around the first bloom, but it's actually a little more effective in the fall. So this is spraying the dandelions when the lilac is blooming versus spraying it when the quaking aspens are going. Creeping perennials, a systemic herbicide right after the first bloom. So this is something like bindweed, for instance. Right after the first bloom, kind of like with the dandelions, a plant goes, all right, I'm blooming, I'm going to make some seed, and now is a good time to take some excess energy and send it into my root system. Makes for a good time to spray it. But again, more effective in the fall. So all these plants are trying to send as much energy to their roots as they can in the fall, and so that really is a good time for those perennial weeds. Some different pre-emergents. I think most people know Preen is the most common one, but Dimension and Barricade also do the same thing. Selective herbicides are going to be 2,4-D, Weed Be Gone, which is Weed Be Gone. There's a bunch of others, but 2,4-D is the main chemical in this. Selective broadleaf herbicide, so this doesn't kill the grass, but do not spray this when it's hot outside. If it's much over 85 degrees, this has a nasty tendency to volatilize into a little mist and then just kind of float around and kill whatever it touches. So don't spray it when it's hot. 2,4-D becomes really unstable. Dicamba is a selective broadleaf herbicide. It does leave some residual in the soil to get things later, but that residual will also kill an ornamental if you try to plant it in that spot. Flazaflop is the Grass Be Gone. This is a grass herbicide. Stinks, takes a long time to work, but it does work. Stinger is a selective broadleaf herbicide, and this one actually has been known to persist in compost. There are actually some horror sides about clopyralid making it through the composting process, and somebody puts compost off and it's in there and it killed entire vegetable gardens or landscape areas. So be careful with herbicides. Non-selective, but also systemic. Glyphosate, we all know this one. This is Roundup. Kills all. Spectricide, it's in lots of other things. This is non-selective herbicide and will kill pretty much all plants. However, it's got really low volatility, so even if it's hot, it doesn't tend to volatilize it and float around like 2,4-D does. And this pretty heavily binds to dirt. So once it hits dirt, it actually binds up with the dirt and becomes mostly inert. But this also includes like times when you might be spraying it on a plant that is dusty or dirty. It might actually bind to the dirt, not actually get into the plant. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're using Roundup. And Roundup pretty stable when you use it because of that tendency to bind to dirt. It doesn't affect things like if you round up something and dig it out, it's probably not going to affect the area if you want to plant later. Alligator is another one, triclopyr. This is a non-selective herbicide. It kills plants, grasses, trees, just kind of whatever it gets sprayed on. So there are some organic methods I want to kind of throw out there, none of which I think are all that effective. Organic methods are great and all. And I'm not actually saying you shouldn't use organic methods. What I would contend is they're just not that. They're not better for the environment, for instance, than say Roundup is. Using vinegar, because vinegar is a pretty nasty thing in and of itself, and I get a lot of people who want to put vinegar on things. It destroys the above ground growth, but it's really just like pulling the weed out without the roots. Using a flame destroys the leaf growth, but doesn't really destroy the roots either. And I've seen some salt or saltwater combinations. There's a lot of these on the internet that are like Dawn dish soap and salt and vinegar, and if you spray it on it, it's supposed to kind of act like an organic Roundup. My contention here is it doesn't work actually as well as Roundup, and it's actually pretty damaging to it'll kill the top end of a plant, but it will also kill soil microbes, which are important to the soil. And the salt, enough salt in the zone will actually kill any plant that is in that zone. So actually, I don't have a lot of faith in these organic methods, not because I don't think they work well. They actually do work a bit. But I actually think they're just as dangerous to use as an herbicide chemical. And I wish people would treat them as such, and just understand that they are in a lot of ways just as bad as the other herbicides. So. And finally, one of the best things you can do to get weeds under control in your neck of the woods is get some neighborhood cooperation. You taking care of your lawn and make sure the weeds are great. If your neighbors are doing it, even better, because that helps keep the weed seeds from arriving in your yard. This was a picture I took a while back when all of the tumbleweed kochia just ended up in this house over in West Oregon. So neighborhood cooperation is a really effective weed control tool as much as anything else. So